Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cameras and Coffee. Well, that is very indiscreet, Steinbeck. Yes, it is. What are you doing? Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Cameras and Coffee. Today's episode is sponsored by The Coldest Water. In today's episode, we're going to talk about my initial results from the Minuta Stereo. So, the Minuta Stereo, there, how's that? Is that what you want? Is that you? Is, of course, this guy right here, and Dominic's Kickstarter campaign is currently going on for it. And he sent me this pre-production unit to test and put through its paces and see how the images turn out. And we have been chatting over email 4 times a week since he first reached out with ideas and observations about what's really working well and things like that. And so there's a lot of things that are really working well here, by the way. So I took 2 rolls of film with C41. There's a roll of 120 that was Lomo Purple, and then there's a roll of CineStill 50D. So some panoramic 35mm images. So, what? And then right now I've got some HP5 Plus in here, but knowing my schedule for the next month, I 100% guarantee I will not get these developed before that Kickstarter ends. So at any rate, so let's take a look here at some of the photos that I've taken with this camera. We're going to start with the 35mm panoramics for the simple fact that they're single images. None of the attempted stereo I attempted to do stereo panoramic images, and I messed up. I put the clicker in the wrong part of the camera. It caused the film to spool incorrectly onto the 120's take-up spool and left a couple of significant scratches on some of the negatives. And also, because I goofed on that, resulted in the whole, in a number of my panoramas ending up being overlaps because the clicker wasn't lined up because I put it in the wrong spot. It wasn't lined up with the perforations, which led to me having to guess how far to advance the film, and I was terrible at that. So, all that said, all right, so the 35mm images. Here's one of a highway overpass over I-70 looking out to the mountains in the west. Those are the, I mean, you can't tell from this image because of the wide angle nature of the pinhole with the panoramic format, but those are the Botanist Peaks out by the Berthoud Pass. And at any rate, so this is a wonderful place to stop and look at some buffalo and stretch your legs along I-70. I hopped out onto the overpass and said, I'm taking a photo of that. One of the things that's really interesting to me is the way that the flare showed up in the 35mm images. And just with what I was shooting, it didn't show up so much in the 120s. But looking at the 35s, we've got some very strong flare in the top left, and then a really interesting rainbow pattern that I thought was unique to digital sensors, but is manifesting here. And I'm wondering if that has to do with the way that the REM jet's removed from the 50D prior to during its conversion to C41 suitability. So at any rate, good sharpness in the image, wonderful colors, and just very accurate. And you can see also in the traffic in the road how long an exposure this was during full sun. Fairly long. I think it was around about a half second. So good result. This was the first photo I took with this camera in panoramic mode, and I was very pleased with it. Here's a shot of just a tree that is along one of the hillsides up on Genesee Mountain in Genesee Park, and it's a place when I'm out that way that it's a fun place to take a stroll over lunch. So that's by the winter trailhead for Genesee Mountain. Here's one showing a little bit of flare. Interestingly, this one with the rocks and the trees and the red dot, that little red dot of flare, I'm not sure if that's actually flare or if it came in through the back of the camera. There is on the back of the camera where I have tape covering it right now. When you use 120 film, you drop a little thing there to reveal that window that's next to the tape, and that's how you count the 120 frames. So I'm wondering if maybe I accidentally bumped that while I was carrying the camera when I had it loaded up with the 50D, which is why there's tape over the lever mechanism for it now. Double exposures. Here's one I found really interesting. It shows the flare, the circular flare with the sun off in the top right of the frame, actually in the frame, as opposed to the first shot we looked at where it was slightly outside of the frame. And you can see the way that the pinhole is, that circular flare, I'm pretty sure, is the reflection of the pinhole surface that's perpendicular to the film. The light that hits that flat surface reflecting back onto the film. I think that's what's going on there. And it is interesting that if that is in fact the case, then what you're seeing is an incredibly perfectly drilled circular pinhole. And that helps explain why shots like this one especially are also really super sharp. So very good on that. And then the other thing of it is you can again see that rainbow pattern, that rainbow mosaic reflection going on in and around that flare. Here's one I tried, portrait. Portrait orientation, also ended up being a bit of a double exposure. So, but interesting to use the panoramic format in this camera in portrait orientation. And no, I did not pay for sprocket scans. I should have. I'm regretting not having done that. At any rate, a few other additional images in here just to kind of show you what this camera can do in the 35mm format. Panoramic format. I have not used it in the 35mm small stereo format. All right, let's take a look at some of these shots here with the Lomo Purple. So really quickly, ignore the colors. They're weird because it's Lomo Chrome Purple film. Has nothing whatsoever to do with the camera, 100% to do with the way that the film is designed. So here's a shot that I took. It was supposed to be part of a stereo, but the other image got messed up. And this is just a view from Genesee Mountain looking out to the south. And what it does is, I think, show the vignetting here of the image. Now, all pinhole cameras that shoot wide will vignette to an extent. So what Dominic's doing here, I estimated the focal plane on this to be 50 millimeters. I don't know what the actual is, but the metering results for a 50 millimeter estimate on this seem to be really spot on. And so that is pretty darn close to as short a focal plane as you're going to get with a 6x6 image. And because the pinholes are a little bit raised, that also means that a little bit of vignetting is going to occur around the tops of the images. Because the pinholes being raised, of course, this projects the image upside down and backwards onto the film plane. So the top of the image is the bottom of the negative when it's recorded, and because the bottom of the negative here is on the cusp of the light of the proper illumination area, there's going to be more vignetting. It's a character that this camera is going to have. Personally, I like it, especially if you have skies in the tops of your images. And that's shown really well here in this shot with this. This is full sun. This image was taken in full sun, and it really does look like it wasn't because of how dark the sky is because of that vignetting. Here is a stereo pair of a tree with a stone building in the background. And so with these stereo pairs, before I start showing them, I'm going to show them for a handful of seconds each. They're going to flicker back and forth between the two images very quickly at a rate of about 10 frames per second. Is that right? That sounds right. I think that's what I set it up to do. And if you are triggered, if you have things like epilepsy that are triggered by that, this would be a good time to just let the video play in the background and keep listening to the rest of the video while I talk about this. If you're interested in going, I don't want you like having a problem because of the flickering back and forth. Okay, so at any rate, here you can see in this image with the stereo pair here again, the top of the image, though it is at the edge of the illumination circle, still records image data, so that's really good. It means that you're not losing any image data because of the rise in the pinhole. And it also will give you very nice dark skies if you're shooting landscapes. Here's another shot where you can see this is that same tree at the trailhead, and I believe this is the one that's left and right. Yeah, it looks like it. And you can see here the sun is in the frame, and it's not casting that really strong circular flare, or it's just outside of the frame, I forget which. It's not casting that really strong circular flare. So, and it is also really doing a good job having the sun right where it is of counteracting that illumination loss at the edge of the circle. Here's one that is, I did this one vertical. So for this pairing, what I did was I had the camera on a tripod and I rotated it this way. So I would experiment with a vertical stereo pair, just because, why not, see what happens. And so this was the result from that. And in terms of what you could do creatively with turning the camera 90 degrees, maybe this gives you a little bit of an idea about that. Here's a single shot that I took. I literally stuck the Minuta into my Christmas cactus and took an up-close photo. It was too close for the parallax correction, so to allow the image to work as a stereo. But here, this is an image where I got the sun in the frame, and you can see the circular flare of the pinhole. But it also does a pretty good job of showing you that the camera's doing a really good job of capturing things sharp that are at infinity, as well as up close. So a pinhole should do that, but there is still a variation with pinhole cameras about how sharp things are up close versus at infinity. And since that flower, the flower was like 1.5 inches maybe in front of the lens, that does a pretty good job of showing that it is sharp across the entire field depth. And now here's one that that illustrates where that starts to break down. And in this shot of our Christmas tree, the very blurry needles were literally touching the camera. And then the sharper ones that are off to in the middle left of the frame were about 3 to 4 or 5 inches in front of the camera. So yeah, so that was basically just a stress test on the camera. Overall, the results were good. I was pleased with how the Minuta performed, and I think the images are sharp and they are usable, and having the stereo pairing, which you can go back and forth on, is good. Some things I would do differently if I had the opportunity before the end of this campaign to do this again with a 120 roll of film, which I just don't have the time for, unfortunately. I would set up some tests where there's a close foreground object and a distant horizon. So for instance, what I mean by close is like 8 to 10 feet away, and then I'd also experiment with things that are 3 to 5 feet away. Just judging by the results I got, the stereo effect is going to be amplified with a greater depth of field and when you have something in the foreground. And that's because stereo works off of parallax. And so what you're going to do when you do stereo photography is you're going to leverage parallax differences for two apertures, 2 lenses effectively, and 2 negatives. You're going to leverage that to give you a result that's pleasing and that you want. And so that's going to be amplified if you have a near foreground object as well as a distant background object. So for those of you who are backing this campaign or have been thinking about it, that's the best tip that I can give you for how you can make the best of your stereo photography. So overall, good results. The camera's performing very well and has withstood some of my standard clumsiness and abuse, being on the end of a tripod, smacked into a tree, things like that. A couple times, yeah, dropped a bunch of times, and it's been holding up to that abuse pretty well. So At any rate, that was Cameras and Coffee for today, and I hope that this video gave you some additional information about the Minuta Stereo and was interesting in some of what it looked at with stereo photography in general. Have a good day, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.